If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are three things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first two steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, editor, poet, and award-winning author of middle grade novel Jet Cooper. I help writers identify and solve their story problems.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and a story editor, and I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish their books faster and without frustration.
And on today's episode, Valerie pitched Hidden Figures so that we can study the four types of protagonists. This 2017 film was directed by Theodore Melfi from a screenplay by Alison Schroeder and Theodore Melfi, and it's based on the novel of the same name by Margot Lee Shetterly. Now, of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. And please help other writers find our show by leaving a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. It's that simple. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe buttons so that you can never miss an episode. All right, Valerie, take it away with the, hopefully, 3 different types of antagonists or something like that for Hidden Figures.
All right, I picked Hidden Figures, hoping for an underdog story. And while it definitely is, I have to say it is a far more interesting version of the underdog than I realized. So yay me for stumbling across a good one. All right, so a typical underdog is someone who is disadvantaged in some way relative to the other characters in the story and relative to the reader or viewer. So, for example, they may be poorer or have a physical limitation or disability. They may be struggling with self-image. They may be less talented. They maybe have less time to achieve a goal. Maybe someone who, for whatever reason, just can't seem to get a break. Something along those lines. The odds are clearly against them, and neither the reader/viewer nor the other characters in the story, with the possible exception of the mentor and or the allies, sees any way for the underdog protagonist to succeed. The villain or the force of antagonism is just so incredibly formidable that it just can't seem to be overcome. And then we, as readers or viewers, we absolutely love underdog stories because there are times in our own lives when we are the underdog, right? When we want to win a race or get a job or get an agent, there are times when it feels like we just can't catch a break either. And the thing with an underdog story is that we really want a happy ending. Like we want and we even need that underdog to win because that's our avatar. That character is representing us. And of course, we want to win. Now, in saying that, any story can end positively or negatively. You'll hear the terms an upending or a down ending, or maybe even a prescriptive tale or a cautionary tale, all different terms that mean the same thing. It is entirely possible to have an underdog story that ends negatively, where the protagonist does not succeed. We saw that with Sicario earlier this season. That's tricky business, boy, because it means that you have a protagonist that starts low and ends lower. And that's a real downer. That is not a feel-good story. And as soon as readers are introduced to an underdog protagonist, they're expecting a positive ending. So a character who starts low but ends high. Now, reader expectations are something we really need to be aware of because they impact almost every part of a story. We have to learn when it's important for us to meet those reader expectations and when we can subvert them. So, for example, when it comes to genre conventions, we've got to meet them or the story will be unsatisfying. Now, we can meet them in interesting and innovative ways, but we must meet them. For example, in a murder mystery, we've got to reveal who the killer is. You know, in the denouement, we've got to reveal who done it because that is a convention of a genre. Imagine getting to the end of a murder mystery and you still don't know who the killer is. I mean, that's going to tick you off. In a romance, there's got to be a happily ever after because that's a huge part of what your reader is reading the book for. Now, it's not necessarily a convention of love stories as a whole because there's lots of different types of love stories. But if you're writing a romance specifically, that's a contemporary romance or maybe a Regency romance, whatever it is, you're going to need a happily ever after. Now, I would argue that a positive ending, if not a formal convention of an underdog story, is certainly an expectation of the reader or, the viewer in this case. And this brings me to Hidden Figures. There are 3 protagonists, Catherine, Dorothy, and Mary. And in the storytelling hierarchy, they are in that order. So Catherine is the primary protagonist. Each of their storylines ends positively. Alleluia. And the catharsis that this creates in the viewer is extraordinary because you get 3 positive endings. Now, this is very much a Hollywood movie, right? With all the requisite things that an actor like Kevin Costner demands. He is the only morally upstanding character in the story. He's the guy to break down the color barrier at NASA. Yeah, it is Hollywood. It is Kevin Costner. Now, Ruth, who is Al Harrison's secretary, she's actually colorblind, I think. The color of Catherine's skin is not an issue for her. And we get a real sense that she is an ally, albeit one who is powerless to affect change because she has no authority or she's disenfranchised as well as a woman, even though she's white. She doesn't have any clout. And her own position is tenuous. They can get rid of her very easily. So Dorothy and Mary are, I would say, traditional representations of the underdog protagonist. They're straightforward examples. And we all know what that is, what that looks like. So today I want to focus on Catherine, who, as I said, is the primary protagonist. And she's a little bit different. An underdog, yes, but represented in a different way or presented in a different way. Within the society as a whole, which is 1960s America and NASA, Catherine is obviously an underdog, and she is facing all of the same obstacles that Dorothy and Mary are. But within her own community, that is her family, her friends, her church, Catherine is a hero type of protagonist. And this juxtaposition between her standing in her own world and her standing in the broader world of the story creates even more empathy from us for her. And it makes us root for her even more. So the movie starts with Catherine as a little girl, and we're shown through the behavior of the adults around her how special she is, how much potential she has. And we see what they're all willing to do to make sure that her potential is realized. Now, that doesn't happen to the every man or every woman type of protagonist. And that doesn't happen to the underdog or the anti-hero type of protagonist either. That kind of thing, that being quote unquote the chosen one, that's reserved for the hero. As an adult, Catherine's 2 closest allies, Dorothy and Mary, also recognize that Catherine is special. Dorothy and Mary are also extremely intelligent women. They have incredible fortitude and resourcefulness. They are pretty amazing in their own right, very strong characters. But even they have singled Catherine out as being particularly special, even among a group of special women, right? So in Catherine, we've got a character who is both a hero and an underdog. I think it's really interesting. Now, how does she break through from that underdog status and win? Well, it takes another hero character, John Glenn, a white guy, to single her out. Catherine becomes the hero that other heroes look to. This is really a really interesting presentation of an underdog. John Glenn wants Catherine to run the numbers. He'll trust her calculations and not anybody else's, and certainly not a machine's. It's Catherine's numbers. She's the hero's hero, uh, for lack of a better term. And it's only then that Al Harrison invites her to be part of his team moving forward because, like I said, she is now the hero's hero. And that's different, right? For an underdog story. Hidden Figures as a global genre is a business performance story. And just like other types of performance stories, whether they're sports stories or the performing arts, often the acknowledged authority within the fictional world, be it another hero or maybe it's an antagonist, recognizes the talent in the underdog by the end of the story. The oppressor or, the villain or the antagonist or the force of antagonism, whatever you want to call it, they are forced to concede that the underdog did something that they didn't think was possible. And here, John Glenn is not only another hero recognizing Catherine, but he is a member of the broader force of antagonism, which is white American society. He's a white guy. He's at the top of the pecking order in this world. It takes Glenn saying that Catherine is special for even Al Harrison, who is the senior authority within NASA and, the star of the show. It takes Glenn highlighting Catherine's ability for Harrison to change his ways, right? And Harrison is the representative of the liberal part of that society. So even the liberal part of the society cannot recognize her talents and her ability until a recognized hero highlights it and shines a light on it. Okay. All of this to say that Hidden Figures offers up two typical underdog character types, but also a character who is both a hero and an underdog at the same time. And I think that makes this story way richer than it would have been if Catherine was a quote unquote standard underdog like Dorothy and Mary are. It's far more compelling, and we are rooting for Catherine so much more because we understand that the world sees her as an underdog, but we also understand she is even more special than the special people. We see her potential, and we really don't want it to be lost. We want her to succeed so badly we can taste it. All right. Melanie, I feel like I didn't even take a breath through all of that. How did you go with your study of the premise this week? I'm curious to see what you did with the multiple storylines happening here.
Yeah, well, that was really interesting for me too. It was, and it was good. But before I go on to that, I just quickly want to revisit my topic from last season, which was constant characters. And I want to do that because Hidden Figures was one of the movies that Anthony Mullins studies in his book that I used as the basis for my research and study last season. Now, this movie was a fantastic example of an ensemble narrative with constant characters, and all three women in it are constant characters because each of these women change the world around them and they change people's views about what African American women can achieve. And these three women remain constant in their values and beliefs, and particularly their values and beliefs about what they can do and what they want to go after. Now, Hidden Figures is also a great example of how one character must stand at the forefront of an ensemble cast. And Valerie touched on this in her piece just before. Catherine takes center stage and is the main narrative, and Mary and Dorothy's stories are woven in and around hers. And it's really good storytelling, and it's a really good way. It's a bit of a masterclass, I think, of stories that have multiple protagonists. But I also want you to think about Dorothy Vaughan, who is on the precipice of change, and has she learnt how to operate the IBM computer and took the human computers with her. Dorothy learnt all she could so that she could stay ahead and not fall behind. Now, why is this important? And I think this is really important because we are on the verge, or we're in, a period of similar change in the creative world. Learn how the machine works so that you aren't put out of work by it. Learn how to function in a world where it exists. And if you sit in the fear bunker, then you'll be overtaken by events. And that's definitely something that Dorothy could have done, and she could have been left behind. Now, I recently watched a reel by the Artificiality Institute. They are a not-for-profit organisation that helps people stay human in an age of artificial intelligence. And Helen Edwards, who is a Kiwi and an expert in complex systems, said the following. And I really want you to think about this and think about Dorothy as I read this. So Helen said, "One of the most important findings in our research is about creative professionals and how they keep AI at arm's length. The reason is very specific. They don't trust it with their identity, and they are right not to trust it. Creatives who have a strong identity and a strong sense of their point of view do not lose sight of what is theirs." Now, Helen is arguing that to remain in control of your choices and author your own life, you need to author your own mind by knowing what you want and what your vision is. Now, think about Dorothy. She didn't wait. She knew who she was and what she wanted, and she taught herself and took her staff with her. These ladies were computers who learnt how to operate the machines. Now, I am not advocating for any second the use of generative AI in your work. Not at all. That is not what I'm about. Because if you're like me and you enjoy writing and learning the craft, then you don't have to give it up. It's who you are. But what you could consider doing is learning about the machine so that you can think critically about what it's offering, so that you can make decisions about how you interact with generative AI, because it is in your life now, whether you like it or not. And it's stories like Hidden Figures that I love, because they remind me about how much stories can give us a way of being in the world. They can present the lessons from the past so that they can be used in the present and the future. So, all right, I will now just hop off my soapbox and get onto the premise. Now, the premise is a one-sentence summary used to guide your story as you are writing. And then it transitions into the one-sentence pitch that you can use when your story is ready to go out into the world. Now, this is one of the things that I love about this little piece of theory. It is small, but it has multiple applications. And just last week, I was off at a book fair, trying to, talk to people about my book. And what I found was knowing my premise was a great way to answer the question, so what is your book about? Especially to people who may be coming over to my table, they've seen all the colours and they want to know a little bit more. But they don't want a whole avalanche of information. They just want a short, sharp summary of what my book is about. So my premise is my go-to, and it usually leads to other questions and then good conversation about the book and its themes. And this is where it's important to understand the difference between the premise and the logline. The premise usually provides writers and potential readers with a sense of the ending. It doesn't give the ending away. It gives you a guiding light when you're writing and an enticing hint of the outcome once you're finished. Now, I found another really good description of a premise in the book Create Unforgettable Stories for Kids by author Nancy Lamb. And she describes the premise as, and I quote, "The premise is what your book is about. Premise is not the plot. It is the underlying idea that supports the plot. The premise is the truth that gives shape to your story and meaning to the lives of your characters." And I really like that quote. And I just thought I'd pop that in here because it adds to what I'm saying. Now, the logline instead doesn't include a sense of the ending, but there are similar elements between the premise and the logline. And those elements are the character and a sense of the character, the plot, and the inciting incident. Now, the premise adds that sense of an ending, while the logline has what's at stake for the characters, and it also usually includes the antagonist. So I just really wanted to point out the difference and what it is that you can do if you have both a logline and a premise, and how to potentially look at elements and break down your story to create both of those really convenient, helpful little one-line summaries of your story. And then you can work out which one you like and which one you want to use for different purposes. Now, one of the log lines for Hidden Figures is 3 female African American mathematicians play a pivotal role in astronaut John Glenn's launch into orbit while dealing with racial and gender discrimination. Now, what I would think the premise is, which is different from the logline that I've just read out, could be that this is the true story of 3 female African American mathematicians working at NASA when the Russians launch a man into space. These women face racial and gender discrimination while making significant contribution to John Glenn's Friendship 7 mission. Now, in Hidden Figures, we're in a slightly different place compared to the other movies this season because it's based on a true story. So, the question is then, do you need to give a sense of the ending in a biographical novel or story that is based on real events where the ending is known? Now, I think the answer is yes, because what is known is the astronaut's story. Hidden Figures isn't about John Glenn. It's about Catherine, Mary, and Dorothy. Their story is less well known, and therefore the ending to their stories should be in the premise and are probably just as important, if not more important, than John Glenn's, in my opinion. But here's where it gets really interesting. Each of the protagonists has their own premise because they have their own story. So I'm just going to quickly go through the premise for each one of these. Katherine Johnson, a mathematical genius, is assigned to calculate the trajectories of John Glenn's orbit around Earth, and despite facing segregation and skepticism, Catherine's work proves invaluable. Dorothy Vaughan teaches herself and her team the program language Fortran so that they can operate the new machine computers at NASA, and she becomes the first African American supervisor. Mary Jackson, aspiring to be an engineer, is encouraged by her mentor to petition the court to attend night classes at an all-white high school, and she becomes NASA's first female African American engineer. Now, while each woman faces racism and segregation, they have their own struggles in their respective fields. A premise for each of the main characters highlights the similarities and the differences in their storylines. Creating a premise for each character in a story with multiple protagonists is useful when determining their individual storylines, but what guides all 3 is the overarching story premise, because this keeps the individual stories on theme and focused in execution. All right, so that was my interesting takeaway this week. So I hope I didn't disappoint. So Valerie, what are your final thoughts on Hidden Figures?
Well, Melanie, you certainly did not disappoint. Don't worry about that at all. I was fascinated. In terms of final thoughts, I would say that if you're planning to create a protagonist who is an underdog, Think hard and long about your reader's expectations of this character type. They're going to be looking for a happy ending, and not just a happy ending, but also a satisfying ending, one that gives them true catharsis. So in underdog stories, the ending is super important.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss Ronin. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want us to review your query letter and the first 10 pages of a writing sample, go to storynerd.ca for all the details about how to submit. To join Valerie's Inner Circle, go to valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle. And for more information about my books, visit melaniehill.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.